So I'm Lou Brown. I'm with the Forum for Scholars and Publics here at FHI. Welcome, everyone. Uh, Thanks for coming. We also want to thank Duke University Press and the Gothic Bookshop for partnering with us to sell books and to make books. So appreciate that. Of course, the book wouldn't be made without an author. So today we're here to celebrate Javier Wallace. He is the Race and Sport Postdoctoral Associate in the Program in Education here at Duke. He completed his PhD at the University of Texas, Austin. Javier is a scholar, speaker, and founder working to uncover and amplify the undertold stories of Black athletes across the Americas. Today, we're celebrating the publication of his book, Basketball Trafficking, Stolen Black Panamanian Dreams by Duke University Press. This book exposes the global pipeline that moves young athletes across borders and into exploitative systems. It's not just theory, it's lived experience, academic research, and policy urgency all in one. Javier's spoken on these issues from TEDx stages to national classrooms, and he was featured in the Sport Emmy-nominated Vice docuseries Scam Dunk. He co-produced and co-directed CB, Power to the Player, the film on Duke's first Black basketball player, Claudius C.B. Claiborne, Dr. Claudius C.B. Claiborne. His work has also appeared on CNN, ESPN, the Travel Channel, and Airbnb. As the founder of Black Austin Tours, he's built one of the most visible cultural storytelling brands in the region, bringing history, place, and narrative together for tens of thousands of guests. At Duke, Javier goes above and beyond in many ways. Those of you who are his students in the room are familiar with that. He leads a Duke Engage in Panama, and he's the faculty director. He's the faculty director for the undergraduate Reginald Howard Memorial Scholarship Program. And somewhere in all of that, he found time to write a book. Guiding our discussion with Javier today is Chris Robinson. Chris is the Associate Books Marketing Director at Duke University Press, where he manages the International Translation Rights Program and works on sales and advertising. He completed his PhD in American Studies at the University of Kansas and is a freelance music critic whose work has appeared in several jazz and hip-hop publications. I want to say an extra word about Duke University Press. At a time when writing, speaking, and publishing about difficult truths is under attack, Duke University Press continues their work. In an increasingly financially challenged landscape, they offer strong support for their authors. The fact that this book is available in paperback from day one is something that should be noted. It's not that common in university publications anymore. And it's a sign of their commitment not just to publishing the book, but to making it accessible to readers. So buy your copy when you're on your way out today. The Gothic is out there, and Javier will be available for signing afterwards. So thanks very much.
No, thank you. I know we're going to start, but just thank you, Lou, for the wonderful introduction. I know I'm taking some steam away from you there. But thank you. I really appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. Really do appreciate it. Thank you for everybody who made this possible. My wife is here, so I thank her for all of the things that she's done to get us here. All the other individuals who have supported me in this project along the way. Really appreciate you all being here, and my students as well, too, that we share space together every Monday and Wednesday. I really appreciate you all. You all really help me think critically about the things that I think about, the things that I write about, and you all are some of my best thought partners and co-collaborators, whether you know it or not, just by engaging with the things that I bring into our classroom space. And you allow me to talk with you all about all the, I don't agree with everything you say. You don't agree with everything I say, but that's totally fine because I like us being able to have critical conversations. So thank you all for supporting today.
All right, yeah, I just wanted to say welcome and thank you for the great crowd and turnout. As a KU graduate, I feel intimidated by a bunch of people with Duke sweatshirts on. Rock chalk, baby. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here and to be able to talk to Javier about his book. And so if we want to get started, would you want to just read a little bit?
Of course.
From it, and then we'll do a conversation.
Great. So I want to read a little bit to you all of the introduction. And if anybody wants to read the introduction and you don't have the book, of course you can purchase it today, but you also can download the introduction online. So if you're on the fence about if you want to get it or not, we're giving you a small taste. But I know you will want to get it. So I'll jump right into the introduction. Saca rápido, get in quickly, the coach yelled from the sideline, hoping the players would inbound the ball quickly after giving up another bucket. His pleas, however, were lost on the players who passed the ball sluggishly back in bounds, eating time off the clock in a game that was over before it began. The opposing team, Las Panteras, had destroyed their will to even finish the competition. Ball! Tito, one of the star players of Las Panteras, a longtime Panama-based private basketball academy, yelled out to his teammates as he leaped into the air in front of his opponent. Since joining the academy years before, Tito had played in basketball in more parts of the country and the world than anyone in his household could ever have imagined, including going on a trip to Washington, D.C. in 2017, when he and I first met, that ultimately transformed his life. Tonight, in 2020, back in Panama City, his teammates answered the call by throwing the ball high in the air with such precision that Tito easily grabbed it and laid it into the rim for the final victorious alley-oop. Summertime in Panama City was nearing an end, and the evening crowd at a popular public park on Via Argentina, one of the city's liveliest streets, was still energized as Tito and 4 of his teammates hurried to change out of their sweaty uniforms post-victory. They were rushing to catch the metro headed to Albrook National Transportation Terminal, the capital's biggest bus terminal, to take the last evening's 1-hour bus ride across the isthmus to their Atlantic City, Colón. Seeing Tito play at the park that evening reminded me of when his mother jokingly told me, "He's your son." He was not my son. I was less than 12 years his senior. Tito had grown up with both of his parents and had a great relationship with his father. However, I was proud to see him play and felt a sense of responsibility and love, as if I had known him my entire life. Maybe the 2 years we had spent in each other's lives from morning to night between Panama and eventually Austin, Texas, made me feel this way. Looking at the now legal adult standing in front of me evoked these emotions. The peach fuzz I remember sprouting on his 16-year-old face was starting to darken and thicken around his jawline, and the muscle mass on his body was increasing. Una foto, I requested of him, capturing the moment on my cell phone's camera the way I had when I last saw him in December 2019 at the Dallas airport, with hopes that I would see him back in Texas soon with a new F1 student visa to attend junior college. 2 years before that, in September 2017, Tito had first arrived in the United States on an athletic scholarship to play high school basketball, an experience that eventually became marked by exploitation and abuse. Ultimately, Tito's scholarship at the private school was revoked by his coach, supposedly based on his academic performance. After that, Tito moved in with my family in Austin and enrolled in public school, slowly piecing his new life and basketball career back together until we were surprised by President Donald J. Trump's 2018 memorandum on combating high non-immigrant overstay rates. With so much uncertainty looming on the horizon, my family and I supported Tito by helping him search for a college basketball scholarship that would allow him to stay in the United States. He received an opportunity to attend a junior college on a new student visa. However, this never happened. When he returned to Panama for the visa adjudication, he was denied re-entry to the United States. Our paths had reconverged tonight. Tito stood there drenched in sweat, his light blue uniform sagged from his shoulders and waist. As usual, when he was being photographed, he did not smile. Instead, he clenched his lips tighter, trying to hide the new braces aimed to correct the childhood issue. For me, the simple act of photographing him at this moment reminded me of what we shared and why I decided to become a part of his life. Before I met Tito, I met his mother, Katia, at a basketball tournament I organized as the athletic director of an elite international school in Panama City. Katia worked the statistic table at the tournament, keeping track of all the vital points throughout the games. Besides the official statistic sheets, Katia also carried a small packet that included a letter detailing how her son's Panama City-based basketball academy, Las Panteras, had been invited to a recruiting camp in Washington, D.C. Accompanying that letter was pictures of Tito, who attended the basketball academy on a scholarship, in the many different uniforms he had donned during his relatively short but highly successful teenage basketball career. There was even a photo with him with Panama, Panama, display across his chest from when he was a member of the National Panamanian Juvenile Basketball Team. Katia, she handed me the packet, and as I flipped through it, she interrupted me to show me a cell phone video of her son dunking a basketball. Despite my amazement at the recorded accomplishments, I kept returning to the picture of Tito dressed in a celestial blue uniform with the gold trim. It read Colón across the chest. The kids from Colón are the best players, but they never get to travel for the showcases and these trips, she said, highlighting how rare the opportunity Tito had been granted through his academy was. I nodded my head, deeply understanding the truth in her statement. My own father is from Colón, and when I first moved to Panama in 2012, I lived in Colón as well. After only a year, however, I abandoned the life I had carved out there in search for more money and opportunities in Panama's capital city. In that moment, I made my decision. I wanted to support Tito not just with his first trip to DC, but his continued basketball career by donating funds for him to become spatially mobile and increase his opportunities of being seen by coaches in the United States. I was excited to call my father, who left Panama for Texas in 1974 on a tennis scholarship and an F1 student visa, to tell him about Tito. On hearing Tito's story, my father reminisced on his youth playing tennis in Colón before attending Houston-Tillotson University, a historically black college in Austin. He detailed how athletes in Colón were underfunded by the Panamanian Sports Ministry compared to those in Panama City, and faced many financial barriers that prevented them from achieving similar opportunities to travel. He recalled how his uncles and family friends pooled their resources to buy him an airplane ticket because his parents could not afford to send him to El Norte. The North is what many Panamanians call the United States. There was almost a 50-year gap between his time in Panama and Tito's, but the narratives were strikingly similar. Seeing himself reflected in Tito's story, my father decided he also wanted to support Tito and funded his entire trip to Washington, D.C. in a gesture to pay it forward. Tito had a great time at the camp in Washington, D.C., where he and Johannes, one of his best friends, were treated like special guests. This trip was not the first time their athletic talent supplemented the less talented paying members of their Panama City Youth Basketball Academy. In the months after he got back from D.C., I met with Tito several times, mainly at Gimnasio Kiwanis, the gym where I first met his mother. He practiced there with his basketball academy twice a week in the evenings before returning to Colón. After the camp in D.C. and a successful international basketball competition in the Dominican Republic, shortly after, Coach Barrigon, a pseudonym, and if anybody speaks Spanish, you know what that means, but a lot of people never caught that. The head basketball coach at Tech Prep, also a pseudonym, a private high school in Texas offered Tito a basketball scholarship. Katia ensured that I was among the first to know about this new development in their lives. We were thrilled. The excitement was short-lived. However, when we discovered that the scholarship would only cover 80% of the tuition, Tito's family would need to contribute the remaining balance, plus an additional $100 per month for living expenses. Once again, limited economic resources resurfaced as a barrier to Tito developing his U.S. hoop dream. After I conferred with my father, we decided to support Tito's family with the additional costs. With that, Tito was off, and so was I, traveling to La Frontera. It's a pseudonym I use for a city to preserve anonymity. Brought Tito to Texas for the first time. I would also be traveling back to Texas to pursue a doctorate at the University of Texas at Austin and reunite my father after living in Panama for more than 5 years. In mid-September 2017, on a scorching Central Texas day, I picked up Tito, who arrived in the United States some days after me from the Austin airport. Tito and I decided before heading to La Frontera, he would make a 2-day stop in Austin. After meeting my parents, visiting the Texas State Capitol, and sitting in on several university lectures with me, he was en route to his new home. For a while, things seemed to go well, but in retrospect, there were warning signs from the beginning, particularly surrounding his academics. Within Tito's first month at Tech, academic performance became a point of contention for us, since I believed he was wasting his opportunity per the information I received from Coach Barrigon. Before leaving Panama, Tito and I had numerous conversations about him using his basketball opportunity to get a U.S. education. Coach Barrigon reached out to me when Tito was not performing up to par academically in his new all-English advanced placement school. My tipping point came when I received a text message from the coach informing me he was revoking Tito's scholarship due to poor academic performance, following an argument to listen to Tito's versions of events. On the 10th phone call, Tito reluctantly explained how Tech was not providing him with any of the promised additional support. Moreover, he explained that Coach Barrigon's real gripe was with his athletic performance. Coach Barrigon expected Tito to become a leading point scorer immediately on his arrival to Tech. However, Tito could not meet the unrealistic expectation of scoring 18 points per game, a quota set unfairly by the coach. Tensions continued to rise when the coach described Tito as a damaged player. Coach Barrigon excused Tito's Panamanian coach and of his mother of sending him to La Frontera with secret hopes that Tech would cover the cost of a knee operation. Tito's hesitant confession, which clearly eased a burden he was carrying, completely stunned me. I was transported back to my collegiate athletic days when I had witnessed something similar. Per NCAA rules, coaches could not get rid of a player because of their athletic performance. However, through surveillance, they could use other infractions, such as poor academic performance, to justify getting rid of a player or revoking their athletic scholarship. It became clear to me that Tito was in a similar situation as an F1 student visa holder. While there were no provisions for removal based on lack of athletic talents, a sponsoring institution can revoke a student's visa if they're not passing their classes. I'm almost done, y'all. Less than 3 months following Tito's arrival, I was on the phone with Katia, who was asking me to take care of her child and bring him to live with me in Austin. Things continued to spiral out of control. We soon discovered that Tito was not just struggling to keep up with his schoolwork in the new all-English academic environment. We also found that he was enduring deplorable living conditions, being fed inadequately, living under threats of being forcibly removed from the country, and being verbally and psychologically abused. All this was being done to him by the same person we had entrusted with his care and advancement, Coach Barrigon. Tito was almost completely alone, and losing his scholarship also meant losing his legal status in the United States. From that fateful day, basketball trafficking became our lived reality, and we redirected the course of our lives. I first encountered the term in news stories, but I have come to define basketball trafficking as the exploitative and unregulated migration of youth to the United States through international interscholastic athletic programs, which in many instances begin with being awarded an F1 student visa. I could have never imagined that Tito would travel from La Frontera back to Austin with a newly acquired out-of-status immigration classification. More important, he was not alone. As the other news stories reported, there were many other young people like him across the United States with similar out-of-status classifications who entered the United States on F1 student visas to pursue their American hoop dreams, which on arrival turned into nightmares. Even at Tech, Tito was not alone. In the housing where Tito lived in La Frontera, there were 8 international non-citizen teenagers in total. 2 were from Panama, another 2 were from Mexico, and 4 were from Costa Rica, all living in deplorable conditions and near silence. We found out only when Katia's childhood friend from Panama, who was living in La Frontera, informed us about the kids' real living situation. When asked how things were going, Tito always answered simply, bien, good. Wow, that was a lot.
Yeah, thank you for that. Tito's story is really powerful. I think if you read the book, I think one of the things that's special about the book is, a lot of academic books will start off with a story like Tito, it's like hook and it grabbed you, and then like the story goes away and it's all academic from the rest. Like what I think is great about this book is follow Tito's story from what you just read all the way through the end. So you get the story, and then you also get the background of the reasons why Tito had the experience that he did. And one of the lucky things about working at Duke University Press is I get to hear about the books a year and a half before they come out. And so when I heard about your book a year and a half came out, the first thing I thought was, whenever I watch the NBA or D1, March Madness, whatever, you always hear about the player from abroad who came to play at a prep school, found success, got into a great D1 program, and is now in the NBA. So I think of players like Joel Embiid, who was at Kansas the same time I was at Kansas, right? Came from Cameroon, went to one of the academies, came to the United States, and now, superstar. Um, but we never hear about the people like Tito. People want the rags to riches stories, right? Nobody wants to hear about people being exploited, whether it's basketball or whatever field it's in. So that was what kind of was like, okay, I think I'm gonna like this book a lot more than some of the other books that Duke publishes, just because I like basketball, the story's a hook, like some other stuff, it's like, great book, not for me. Um, you know, I'm in marketing, so all of our books are great. But anyway, so you described a little bit about how you met Tito in there and your relationship and supporting him. But when did you realize I want to turn this story into a book and get at the deeper reasons behind the situation? Like, can you take us through the idea to the research to the publication process?
Yes, most definitely. Thank you for that, Chris. I often talk about Joel Embiid quite
nice.
often. I don't know if any of my Philadelphia students are in here, but they have some strong opinions about Joel's current status in Philadelphia. But for me, he is a great poster child in many ways about the rag to riches story that exists between somebody who emerges from an international background from another country, comes to the U.S. through prep school, makes it to college, then becomes a standout star in the NBA, trusts the process. I mean, and many people believe that is the potential or the standard route for everybody who's coming, but it's not. And so for me on my end, as I come to write this book, I'm on the other side of this, where it's not a success at all. And it is very problematic and troublesome from the beginning of the entire experience, which even in Embiid's story, if we really dive into Joel Embiid's story, he has a lot of initial troubles when he comes to the United States. If I'm not mistaken, he doesn't even enter in Mount Verde at first, right? He enters in another school before making it to Mount Verde. And so we're used to hearing the narrative of him coming from Mount Verde to Kansas, but very few people talk about what school he first gets to when he leaves Cameroon in the U.S. and some of the reasons that he was making these transitions to the next school. And so I came in that process with Tito, where it just seemed like a great opportunity. I was living in Panama. I'm Panamanian on my father's side, and things just seemed right to support this young person, as I mentioned in the introduction, based on our shared histories and what I aspired to do as a descendant of Panama, living internationally as well, too, is provide opportunities. And my dad was a willing participant to provide opportunities because of how he used sport in his life to build the life that he has had in the United States. And especially coming from his background as somebody who initially enters the United States unlawfully, he's forcefully removed from the country. I learned that about my dad while writing this book. I always thought that he entered the country when he came to play tennis, and he was like, that's the second time that I came to the U.S. This time I just got to stay. And he built his life from there. And so it was just a process of trying to pay it forward. And so I'm working with Tito in Panama before things start going bad, just to see how we can make this thing work. And we're making it work. As crazy as it is, we're making it work. But by the time things start going bad, and they start going bad quickly, I am a PhD student at the University of Texas at Austin. And so the big goal for many doc students is to leave the program with the finished product, which is a dissertation. And so my initial dissertation topic was exactly what we're doing with Duke Engage in Panama, is working with young people in a marginalized community, Kurundu, and how they think about their identities and social programs like race, sport, and soccer. And that's what I wanted to write about. But Dr. Lewis Harrison and Dr. Jennifer Adair, both of my co-supervisors on my dissertation project, are also people who I was talking to virtually every day about Tito. And they just, both of them, I don't know if they had a meeting before they talked to me separately, but they said, you know what? That soccer identity stuff is nice. You can write about that. But this basketball thing that you're talking about, this thing that you just keep telling us, you need to write about that. You need to talk to us about that. And so I just ended up doing deeper research on what was happening to us. And I was trying to figure out not just what was happening, but the roots of why and how these things were happening. And so that just naturally came with being in a PhD program where they're training us on different research methods and me just applying that. I mean, I was up, I admire my hustle at that point in time, and not because I still do, not because I'm thinking like arrogantly so, but I was hustling for Tito at UT. I mean, when I found out there were people that were working in the LBJ School of Public Affairs that had worked in Washington, D.C. and had worked on immigration issues, hadn't heard about basketball issues, I was emailing them. I just want to talk to you. I just want to talk to you. And luckily, they would welcome me into their offices and they would just share stuff with me. And I'm like, wow. The first time I heard about the Condoleezza Rice-led youth basketball think tank initiative that they came out from Washington, D.C., I thought it was amazing. But I met with a certain professor, and he was like, they just do that when they want to get rid of an issue. They put these places, and you know, we haven't heard about it since. And so I was just learning so much, and then it just emerged as a dissertation. And for the readability part of it, this is a pro tip, the secret. I knew I didn't want to write something that was inaccessible, and I had to figure out how to do that. And so somehow I came across this book called How to Write an Ethnography That Everybody Can Read. It's a workbook, and I read that from start to finish, and I applied it to the way that I wrote my dissertation. Thankfully, I had my advisors who were on board, and they agreed from the beginning that what I was writing was going to become a book. And so they allowed me to write my dissertation as it was going to be a book that was not thematic. It was thematic, but it was, of course, chronological. And so that's how the book came about, just being in the program and having some real supportive individuals, both working directly with me and from the larger university community that were willing to pour into me to help me better understand.
Okay. So the trick for me is, so you're very personally invested, financially invested, emotionally, you know, everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to get at the roots of the why and the how, and learning the method, you know, taking your methods classes and doing all that stuff that PhD students that we have to do, right? And maybe this is impossible, but how did you try and find like a balance between this very personal story and also trying to work with the scholarly objectivity, working in like, okay, here's kind of what's expected of an ethnography or an anthropologist, or like, can you talk about the balance there, or was there a balance?
I write about this in the book. I know it might be in the method section, but I definitely grappled with this from when I was writing it. And I'm so happy that I read the ethnography Black Men Can't Shoot, which was written by Scott Brooks. Scott Brooks, I think he's still at Arizona State University, and Scott Brooks ends up being on my dissertation committee. And Scott Brooks, in his Black Men Can't Shoot ethnography, which is about Black boys in Philadelphia playing high school basketball, going from public school to private schools, he makes this pretty profound statement that he can't be objective. Like, it is, you asking me to be objective is asking me to forego everything that I am and what brings me here to this work. Even the relationship that I have, and he calls himself the researcher as a friend, and I conceptualize it as the researcher like un tío, like an uncle, because of the way that I was in proximity to this young person, while I'm not old enough to be his parent, but I still have this authoritative type position with him, helping him through school, being strict when I need to, but we can still have a different type of relationship. So I never strove for objectivity in this book, not even one bit. I wanted to be critical of myself, and I am critical of myself because I understand that complicity comes in on my part as somebody who played college sport, who knows how exploitative and abusive the situation is that we get into. But on the other end of that, I also knew and know that from lived experience personally, my own experience at Florida A&M playing football, and not having to pay 1 cent to the university for that degree, other than parking tickets. Y'all pay y'all parking tickets. I only pay for parking tickets. And that has set the trajectory for my life. I only paid for 1 semester of college. And all that comes as a result of football. And now we can talk about the exploitative sides of it. I don't think I would exist if my father doesn't have that opportunity to be a student athlete, as problematic as that is, when he comes to the United States in '74. And so the way that I at least felt somewhat okay with it was, I was like, I know he might not make it anywhere with basketball beyond going to college, but also knowing the situation for Black boys and Black people in Panama, and those specifically of us from Colón, where we have to say, I said in the book, everybody in Colón has to say, todo en Colón no es malo. Not everything in Colón is bad. And I don't know why, I understand why we have to say that to the public, because a lot of people associate us with criminality, associate us with everything what's wrong with the country, and also associate us with those things also being Black. And so I knew that if he at least could work through this exploitative system and get an education, learn how to speak English better than what he did, to the level that I was able to speak, or maybe some of his ancestors, his life would just be this much better if he had to go back home to Panama. And so I was willing to help him through this system with that, because I believed on the other side would have him a better chance. And so I never try to be objective at all in the book, but I do try my best to be critical and look outside the situation when needed to. But also, we don't know his name in this book. I have never said his name publicly in the last 4 or 5 years, is because that's not what he or his family wants right now. And so I respect that. And there's certain things that never made it in the book, because as compelling as I think they would be for a reading audience to engage with and see, some things don't need to be relived for certain people. And so I never try to be objective. And I know from an academic standpoint that I might lose points with some of my peers. And guess what? I'm okay with that. I literally am okay with that, because I'm happy with what it is that what we produce, because I'm confident that what it is that we produce will hopefully be a guide for somebody else that's going through this. But the whole objectivity part of it, and again, if anybody's interested from a methodological standpoint, I think in the appendix in the back of the book, for those of us who are scholarly, like, you can hear my take on this, and it's a very scholarly take, and you can cite it, and you can build your methods from what I'm saying, because I'm pushing back. I'm really pushing back on what people have trained me to do.
Yeah, because that the idea of scholarship is like step back, especially in the tradition of anthropology and ethnography, like the kind of detached observer. But how you put the uncle, friendly uncle, or that's really interesting to me. And you speak about, right, Tito's experience is not unique, right? It was at the same, people on the same team had the same experience. And one thing that struck me was when things went south with the visa and everything, there was a moment, and I might not quite get the details quite right, but where Coach Barragán, he had all this power over Tito and the players and whether or not they could stay basically in the team in the country. But it seemed like he was also not accountable. Like, his name was not on any of the paperwork or anything that actually dictated what happened to Tito as far as his immigration. So his power is that common in the kind of this prep school scene? Like, is that just how it is universally, or?
I think it's how it can be. Every school is different, and so I always think about the ranges of prep schools and academies that exist now, because we have the freedom in the United States to create schools and educational opportunities for our young people. There are wide ranges, right? You have a traditional private school that might be related to a religious body that is in the historical habit of recruiting kids from marginalized backgrounds to come play in their athletic programs, but they have the infrastructure in place to care for those young people in process visas. But then you have all the way to the other end of it. You have somebody who is just wanting to get a piece of the action and can create a school and can partner with a private school that wants to have a good athletic team, or they can get a online educational unit and then start calling themselves a school. And then if they have the authority to issue the F1 student visa, depending on the type of school they are, that can dictate what level are in the coach's position. So like there are schools where the coaches, especially on the lower end of the schools, where coaches are in these positions where they're coaches, they're like administrators, they run the school. And so you do have instances where, as I describe in the book, where a coach who is not legally on any paperwork for the school still has a sway in the school and has decision-making power. Or you can have somewhere where the coach is more at the mercy of. He or she, they can make suggestions, they can make strong suggestions, but they're not the designated school officer, the DSO that the federal government requires be there. They don't make those decisions on behalf of anybody, and they have to broker, negotiate with these individuals on the students that they bring. And again, they might have more sway than other, depending on the situation, but it can happen where a coach can be overtly involved and show up. But in many cases, because the coaches are not designated school officers, because they don't actually, they might agree to give a scholarship, but they can't disperse funds. And so somebody else's name will appear, and then they can be completely absolved from the entire situation, other than being the figure that recruits and manages and coaches these young people while they're here.
So it seems like the coaches in those instances are really strong figures in the system of the basketball
100%.
exploitation.
100%.
Okay. One of the other things that struck me, and you talk about, there's at least one chapter where you talk about, it was kind of surprising to me that Tito's father spoke fluent English. I think his grandfather spoke English, but Tito did not speak English. And you go into the long history of anti-Blackness and why that's so with people in Cologne. Would have Tito's experience or the experience of his teammates been different if he was fluent in English, or would he still have been kind of exploited and trafficked? And
Wow, that's a deep question I could spend a lot of time with, because there's a lot of hypotheticals in there for me. So what I will say is Tito on his father's side, like my family in Panama, comes from a history of people who migrated to Panama from English-speaking colonies, primarily Barbados and Jamaica, to labor in the construction in around the Panama Canal in different industries. So we have a history of speaking English. And so Tito's father, both of his parents come of that lineage. And so Tito's father grew up speaking English the same way my father grew up speaking English. My father, he always knew Spanish because Spanish was there, but he doesn't learn academically Spanish until he enters school and when he's 5 or 6 years old. But he grows up speaking English. And so I think it possibly could have been different for him if he spoke English, because he might have been able to navigate the school system a little differently, maybe been able to engage with the schoolwork differently. However, while I'm reluctant to say it would be different, but that would require Panama to have respected these Black English speakers or French speakers when we first arrived in the late 19th century, and putting the infrastructure in place to have a multilingual society where we would have education that was accessible to everybody in the country, not just those who can afford it, to have an English education. So when they go to apply to come to the United States, and we have these rules here at schools where you have to be proficient in English, you have to or graduate from a school where English is the first language, I think would mark the difference. However, that's not the case. And so I think even though he could have been a more fluent English speaker, his record still would have been in Spanish because he's coming from Panama. And so I think that's a big difference maker there, is because I think the reason why that we see a lot of young people from the global South, particularly not just Panama, but from the global South full stop, mostly involved in these trafficking cases, is because of English, because of the mandates of the United States education system to be in English. And to come to Duke as an international student, you have to show evidence that you are a proficient English speaker. And so a lot of these kids that are coming from the global South, where countries where English is not the official language, or countries like Nigeria, where English is the official language, but there is just an inherent racism that our systems have with countries like Nigeria in devaluing the type of English that they speak, or assuming they don't have an academic English. So the level that you have to go through is completely different if you're coming from Canada, if you're coming from Australia, if you're coming from England. It's just different how you have to apply. And so it would be hard for a kid coming from the global South where Spanish or French is the dominant language, and they haven't gone to an English medium school where they've been taught in English, their records are in English, to come immediately to the United States at the college level. And so we see a lot of these younger people coming at the high school level because they don't have to contend as heavily with that language component like you do at the college level. And I think by virtue of that, when we trace it all down, I think that's why we see more young people from the global South, where English is not the predominant language, being involved in these trafficking situations, because they have to jump over that language hurdle earlier to qualify to play at the NCAA or NCAA-sponsored institution.
Yeah. So the basketball trafficking is still going to happen whether Tito speaks English or not. Yeah. So what is there? Do you think the relationship is, or the role that higher education institutions play, as far as like reinforcing the racial and economic inequalities within sports? Like I grew up close to Gonzaga, and they recruit a lot of players from Australia.
Yeah.
And the West Coast Conference has a lot of players from Australia. So how's higher ed complicit? To what degree are they complicit in this?
I think higher ed is 100% complicit, because higher ed forms the pipeline. Basketball specifically, and football, because it's hard to make it to the NBA. The WNBA is a bit different because of how women's sports works. But NBA specifically, if you're not coming through the NCAA, and we've seen the supposed new competitors to college basketball spark up that are providing these alternative routes to the NCAA to skirt the NBA's eligibility policy of having to be 1 year removed or 19 years old, right? We saw the NBA Ignite, that failed, right? We saw some of the players like the Ball family that one of the young people wanted to go to Europe first. And they thought that would set a precedent and more kids would jump to Europe to play professionally and then come back to the NBA. That has not come to fruition. And the NCAA, we can look at every draft, including the one that's probably coming up soon. The majority of all drafted NBA players are coming from NCAA, 100%. In our school, we hold a high majority of those kids that are drafted. And so I say that because they help form the pipeline. And so while they might not be the ones that are taking advantage of the kids at the high school level, because the NCAA institutions have way better security measures in governance and a blanket governance over their institutions than a private school that doesn't report to any governing body and they do what they want, it still feeds into this pipeline of the NCA or higher education. So I think higher education for that reason, and the second one, but that reason should be paying attention. And then also, as we talk about in the book, when Tito realizes from a college coach who's been coaching college basketball for decades, and I realize this too, the coach is telling us, I'm giving you this scholarship to come here. I understand that you need to get a visa. I understand that. But I'm giving you this scholarship, and you can come here now. You don't have to go back home unless you want to try that process out, but I'm giving you that now. And so, and that's true. We have higher institutions of higher education. I think we need to have these policies in place where institutions of higher education can offer educational opportunities to people, young people in our country who are experiencing unstable migratory statuses, who might not have citizenship, and they need a pathway into higher education to try to build out the life that they want. And so I say that because if Tito does take, if he does take the scholarship, but if he takes it in the way of not going to Panama to re-adjudicate his visa, higher education would have had him. And so what is higher education, athletics, and academics? What are we doing to support these young people that we're having? And I saw this in North Carolina Central University when they were on the ESPN show. I can't remember the name of it, but it was a very popular ESPN show. And they had a young person from Africa. And I could tell, based on what I know, that he was experiencing very similar issues on being here in the US, but he was at North Carolina Central. And I could tell that they didn't know how to handle his situation because he could never go back home. He missed his mother, and that was pretty evident. And the series ends with them inviting his mother to come to the United States. They never tell us why he can't leave, but you know, it's safe to assume in many reasons why he's not able to leave. And so higher education also has to be prepared as these kids are here, is what do we do when we have them? How are we prepared to serve them? How are we prepared to ensure that while they perform and they labor for us, that we can provide them with the resources that they need to be in the country without a migratory status? How can we help them find pathways for relief or pathways for citizenship or pathways to use this education that they're receiving in a meaningful way when they stop playing the sport? So I think higher education has a huge responsibility in this role, not only complicit in it, but responsibility to respond to it.
So if we just take Duke as an example, or any big D1 school, KU, Kentucky, whatever, at what level in the administration would those changes need to come from? Who would need to be kind of leading the charge? Would it be the coach? Would it be a dean somewhere, the athletic director, student services? Who would be the person to lead the charge?
I don't know who would be the person to lead the charge. I know everybody has a role to play. Definitely, I think compliance has a big role to play because compliance enforces bylaws and governance, and they should be aware and educated. And many times they are, and I think they have to do they would have to work closely with our international office. And I know that they do when they bring in students who are international, they have to, but I think they need to be aware of the complexities, and also coaches as well too, right? Because when coaches are traveling and we have more international exhibition games and games coming up, coaches need to know, what are the implications if I take said player with me out of the country? And what happens if said player is not able to enter the country again? And he or she is from Nigeria, but we go to Canada. And now this kid can't get back into the United States. What do we do with this kid in Canada? And we have the game, what do we do with the kid? It's how do we get them back? Do we leave them in Canada? Now we set them up for another place that they don't have lawful status to be in. How do we get them back to Nigeria? What if they don't want to go back there immediately? And so I think coaches need to be aware as well in their recruiting practices. Here at Duke, we have international athletes on our men's basketball team and women's basketball team. And I don't think we're going to stop having them because they're doing pretty good. And they're doing very, very good. I mean, one of our biggest stars last year, Kaman, Kaman is straight from the NBA academies in Sally, Senegal. I met him in Sally, Senegal before he touches any ground here in Durham, North Carolina. And so I know we're not going to stop. And so everybody needs to be aware of when you recruit a young person that's in the U.S. or outside the country, what are the implications for those young people to be here? And I think everybody has to be aware of the AD, compliance, the coaches, recruiters, who are you working with? Who is the person that is bringing these young people to your attention to make sure that you aren't involved in anything that is further jeopardizing the young person's career? Who is the young person's guardian? Is it an actual parent? Is it a coach at their school who's saying now they're a parent? Are they negotiating on the behalf of the young person? What are you telling this coach? Have you even talked to the parents, the actual parents? Or have you only been talking to the recruiter and the handler? Not the same conversation. Nowhere near the same conversations.
Right. How we doing for time? I know we wanted to say some question and answer. Yeah. So
Of course.
yeah, question and answer time.
Oh.
I have a question. I'm so excited to be here. This is great.
Hi, I'm Cecilia. I'm just so excited about this. I had two questions which are unrelated. One is about the history. When does this emerge, right? Because I know you also write about earlier practices or sort of earlier diasporic kind of travel for sport, right, from Latin America. And I'm curious, when does trafficking as a kind of framework emerge? And then the other is about this point you were making about women's basketball. And so I'm sort of curious, as women's basketball is increasingly ascendant, are we seeing this sort of creep into that? I think about stars like Camila Cardoso and things like that who are sort of and I'm curious if you see them as representative of a similar trend. So thank you.
Yes, thank you for the question. Nice seeing you, Cecilia. Love your work, 100%. Y'all check out Cecilia Marquez. Take classes with her, by the way, as well, too. First question about history. I do a lot of deep historical diving, as you know well, about Black Panamanians specifically that are coming to the U.S. to play sport. I start with my father because he comes in 1974, and I start tracing back from my father, from the generations before him, the people who helped recruit him from Panama that are Black Panamanians, mostly of West Indian origins, that are working in segregated institutions in the United States reserved for Black people, like segregated high schools and historically Black colleges that are reaching back to this population of people in Panama and offering them these athletic opportunities to come here to play, like places like North Carolina Central, like places like South Carolina State. I think one of the biggest tennis stars, George Stewart. In history, we should know more about him, but I think one of the reasons we don't know more about him is because the person that brings him down from his 7 titles that he wins in Black tennis in the ATA is Arthur Ashe. Arthur Ashe beats him when he's 16 and George is 37. And so this 16-year-old comes in and becomes the next phenom in tennis, but he takes it from a Black Panamanian who is well aware of race. He talks about racism when he first comes to the United States in 1940s in Philadelphia. In the newspaper, he's asked, "What do you think about racism?" And he tells the reporters, he said, "People keep asking me this question. Do I know what racism is?" He's like, "Of course, I know what it is." He's like, "I live in Panama." And he's telling them, "I live in Panama. We have segregation in Panama as well, too, especially in the Panama Canal Zone. I'm not new to this." And so there's a history of these people coming here, and I think they play back. I think it transitions along the lines when things transition in Panama, is when the Panamanian populace becomes it's always a contingency of Panamanians that don't want U.S. imperialistic there, and I agree 100%. And so you start to see the closing, of these Black institutions. No longer can they be colored institutions, they become Latin American schools. And then they become phased out. All the teachers are retired, here in the US, Black teachers are not integrated, Brown v. Board. Same thing happens in Panama. These Black educators are not integrated into these white American high schools because parents of white American students saying, we don't want them teaching our kids. They're not qualified. And so my dad is of that last generation where you have this kind of natural reaching back. There's no big money in it except going to college, there's money in it, but there's no big money like what we see now. And it's really about education. So I think by the 70s, 80s, 2000s is definitely something totally different. Second question about women's basketball. Yes, this is happening to girls. Yes, this happens in women's basketball. Yes, it happens in women's basketball at the high school level here in the United States. We should be paying the same attention to women's basketball in the U.S., high school girls basketball, high school girls AAU, because it happens. While the WNBA might not be the place where women can get paid the most to play basketball, it's still very prestigious, it's still growing, and still the NCAA produces a lot of great women basketball players. And so the same way that boys are looking to play NCAA men's and try to play NBA, which are all located in North America, girls are also trying to play women's basketball in college. And women are also trying to make that next jump as well, too. And so there's a great person who I work with, Batuli Kamara. She is Ghanaian American. She played at UConn. She's from Guinea American. She played professionally in Spain. And she's seen very similar things happening to African girls in Europe that are coming at very young ages to Europe, and they're playing in these professional teams, but she noticed things aren't right. And then there are a number of young girls in the book, I talk about them too, that also are experiencing this as well. I focus the NBA because of the NBA's prominence in North America, but it does happen with girls as well too, because it's the same for girls. The same exact thing for girls. The WNBA is just the only thing that makes it a bit different because, women don't get paid a lot to play in the WNBA. And and those students who are in here, we've had that conversation. Women don't get paid. A lot of women have a college, outside of endorsements and NIL, a lot of very, very talented women could possibly earn more in their academic endeavor getting a job than going to play for league minimum in the WNBA. Thank you for the question. Hey, Sam.
Hi, my name is Sam. I'm a student here at Duke. Dr. Wallace, congratulations on the book launch.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to be here. I was just wondering how important you think it is that this book is coming out of Duke University in the state of North Carolina.
Hey, great question. I don't think there's a better place for it to come out. And I thought that when I initially took the offer to come here, I was like, where else in the country would be a better place to have a book about basketball and be able to hopefully create a platform where we can launch out and help address the issue than Duke. And I've been in a very good position to engage with a lot of the aspects of the program, including the international aspect. And there's I don't know if some of the team members are in here, but I've been able to go to Senegal, like I mentioned, and engage with people in Basketball Africa League, NBA Africa. The students who were in my class last week, we had the person who helped launch NBA Africa come and speak to our class. And the only reason I know that person is because he went to Duke, and they wanted to be involved with something at Duke. And so I think Duke is the best place because of our basketball prominence and what I would hope to be our commitment to wanting to address some of the issues that are impacting the thing that brings us so much attention. Great question.
Hi, Dr. Wallace. My name is Ian. I'm a student at Duke as well.
Hey,
Congratulations once again.
Thank you.
My question is regarding the substantive policy change. Where do you believe we need to start with that? Is it in the way that the universities are interacting with the Department of Homeland Security, or does it need to be a more substantial push from Congress in reforming the way we look at this F-1 visa?
Great question, Ian. I literally think we need an act of Congress, because that's literally what it would need. Take an act of Congress to change the student visa as it stands. And we know that there are people pushing for that because of what we see happening with name, image, and likeness in international students. We know that there are politicians that are pushing for legislative change, and it hasn't happened as of yet, because I think it is a very heavy push for that to happen. I do think there are some things that we can do in the interim that might not need an act of Congress to help us bring light. Currently, there's no space on an application for a student visa for somebody to reveal that they're coming to play for sport. I think if we even had just add that line, are you participating in varsity level athletics? It would at least help us know who is doing what in the case we need to seek them out. Because we have over 1 million F1 visa holders in the United States right now. And if we don't know even how many are playing sport at a collegiate or high school level, how will we ever, we couldn't sparse through that. I think at a more granular level at an institution, if institutions have access to these students that are experiencing some of these issues, I would encourage them to, as I'm finding, to lean in and not lean away, because I think it's easy to lean away from some of these kids because you just don't want to deal with that. And I get that, because who wants to bring a problem? Who wants to bring somebody that has unlawful migratory status? Can they be deported? Who wants that problem? But it's also, you want that person's talent. That's why they're here. And so I think at that level, we can educate ourselves on what do we do when we do have them, and how do we not lean away from what's going on? Because what I have found, any person that I've talked to that's involved with basketball at any level, but here at college, player, coach, AD, any person, I've talked to them, and everybody has seen something similar. And they have made intentional decisions to say, you know what, I didn't try to learn more. I just know something was happening. It was a kid, and something wasn't right, but I didn't want to get involved in that. And I left it alone. And so we have it happening. And I think one thing we can do is also vet, again, the people that are bringing these talents to you. Who is the handler? You're excited about the prospect that they're bringing to you, but who is the person that's bringing them to you? Is this a reputable person? What's the relationship this person has to these kids? Dive deep into that, because you can get yourself caught up with somebody who has a whole thing going on that you don't know about, but you're just so interested in the talent that they're bringing to you that you're not realizing what they have going on. Yes, of course. Would there be any other questions? Hey.
Hey, Javier, thank you so much.
Yes.
And congratulations. Also,
Thank
I should say my students haven't stopped talking about you since you visited a few weeks ago. I would love to hear your thoughts on how, we get, and I haven't read the whole book, just the introduction. So I'm really excited to read all of it. But also, we get these narratives of the extraction, right? The trafficking and the forced migration outward. But I'm also interested in your thoughts, or to what extent the return factors into any of these stories, and how these experiences change a return home, right? And change the relationship to home. So I guess both from the players and the athletes' perspective, but also perceptions of people, of a Panamanian, right, perception, right, and shifting perceptions of, this
Yeah.
imagined U.S. hoop dream. So I'd love to hear more about
That's
that.
actually a great question. And I think my father helped me the best with tackling or thinking about that, because my father, in my route to learning how he first entered the country and understanding that he entered unlawfully, that's when I really understood what it was that he was doing, even when things started to go bad. When things started to go bad, my father was a person that was saying, he can't go back to Panama right now. He can't leave. My dad said he has to leave with something in his hand. He can't go back home empty-handed. And then also we know from the research, particularly around soccer trafficking, West African migration, irregular migrations to Europe, a lot of the research was talking about the element of shame that a lot of players had around if they had to go home, or the thought of returning home if it didn't go well, because so many people had invested in this dream that they had to go to this country, with many of them have never been to, and thought that they have had their lives made, but they have to return. and the shame of returning, the shame of being in front of your family, your peers, and being seen as a failure. And I think from what I've seen with different cases of young people who had to go home because they were forcefully removed, or they make the decision like Tito to remove themselves and try again, or in our deny re-entry, it's that element of shame. It's that element of trying to hang underneath the radar, try not to have as many interactions with people who know about their previous moves there. And so that's important because it's about, a lot of them experience shame as well too. And I also think from a larger Panamanian perspective, from which I can speak about, for non-athletes that are in this whole situation, it's also that it's hard. I want to say a false reality, but we also. I mean, I was talking to my great aunt in Panama, and she was saying something very similar, and my father was saying something very similar as well too, about when he first went to Brooklyn for the first time. And Brooklyn is where there's more Panamanians than anywhere outside of the Republic of Panama is in Brooklyn. The Panamanians are in Brooklyn, and he was like, a lot of people weren't living any better than they were living when they were in Cologne. He's like, everybody was in a similar position than we were before we even left. But it's hard to tell that to people at home. Is that, maybe you show up one time a year for carnival time, you spend a lot of money, but you coming back to living that same marginalized, impoverished life, facing criminalization, bad schools for your children in Brooklyn. And so a lot of us still see this opportunity as the golden ticket, but in many times it might not be. And we all live in this imagination, fictitious world that El Norte is better. It's better. And for many of us, even outside of sport, it hasn't been better. Sometimes it is better compared to from which we come, but sometimes it's not. You just traded that for a life in the United States. Thank you for the question.
So it's almost 11:15. Maybe we should move towards wrapping things up. I just thought
Okay.
maybe, Javier, I wanted to give you a chance to say, what's the question that you want people to ask that you didn't hear today? Or how do you want to leave us today?
I want to leave us encouraged to think about the young people that are competing on courts and fields for our entertainment. And can we see them beyond what it is they're doing for us? And think of them as whole people that have lives, that have dreams the same way that we do. And we should be invested in them more than just what they do for us. My students that are Philadelphia fans, they're not here, but I would say that they were here anyway. The reason why I bring up about the Joel Embiid part is because one of our students believes that Philadelphia is wasting $72 million a year on Joel Embiid. And while I get the financial aspect of the whole sport thing, and that is a lot of money to pay somebody, and you definitely have your beliefs as a fan if that person is performing or not performing. But what do you actually know about him in his life and the things he's had to go through? And it's so easy for us to commodify them and reduce them to a number because we don't like what it is they're doing. But whether that number is 72 million that Embiid can get in Philadelphia, or if it's an athletic scholarship that Tito's trying to get and somebody's calling him damaged goods, it's very similar. And at the end of the day, both of those individuals can be discarded, and we'll just say, oh, it's sport, they didn't do well. But both of those instances, you have damning factors that can impact their lives tremendously, even if it's not the money part in Embiid. But if you read the piece, Caleb sent me the piece, the long piece about Embiid, we know that all that money that Joel Embiid has acquired because of his basketball skills probably mean very little to the amount of mental health struggles that he has had to encounter as a result of sport, as a result of this migration from his family when he was 14, as a result of having to miss that tragic day when his brother died, and his brother died en route to see him in the draft, and he never had a chance to see him ever again. And he did this all for this basketball dream that we now can say we're wasting $72 million on. And the same thing with Tito. He leaves his home at 16 to try to do something better, to make his life. And he can't, because somebody else decided he was damaged goods and decided to take that from him and send him back to where he came from. And now he's making life for what it is. So I just want to leave us on, can we see these individuals as people and not just what it is that they do for us? And could we give that same level of care to them? So I would leave us on that.
That is a beautiful way to leave us. Thank you.